Hi, today I'm going to talk about 7 steps to painting a miniature model. Hi, welcome to Gray Lightning, my video blog about making things and playing games. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably know that one of my hobbies is to paint miniature models. Now, I've never actually made a video about that, but I have made several videos about making scale models like this one to use as terrain for these types of armies. My army is the Circle Orboros Hordes army. This is what's known as a gargantuan. This is really the normal size of a miniature. So this is really huge by normal standards. And my Christmas present, one of them was my son assembled and primed this for me so that I could then paint it. So there are a lot of really excellent videos online that are done by what I consider almost, well, really professional people that work for the companies that make the models and the paints. And for me, they're very informative, but they're also a little bit intimidating because they show a level of effort and time that I'm not really willing to put in. So what I thought would be useful is to do a quick overview that shows you 7 steps that if you execute them and have some patience, I'll talk about how much time is required, what the materials are, what the tools are, that will give you this level of results. I'm going to show that step by step using this model right here. So here are 7 steps to painting a miniature model. The tools that are required are really quite simple. I like to use these handles to hold my miniature so I can turn it and even turn it upside down if I need to paint in the hard to reach places. I use a handful of high-quality brushes. The largest I can get away with are these here, and most of my brushes are quite small. You should have really good lighting, and if you're like me, you may need magnification to help you see the small detail. So here are the 7 steps. The first is to assemble and prime the model. There are many different types of cement. This is what we used on the big Storm Raptor. Some models are made out of metal, many of them are made out of plastic, so the cement you use is going to be based on what your material is. Plastic or metal, you need to prime it. We use a black matte primer that we spray on with an airbrush, or you could also use it in a spray can. One of the decisions you have to make is how far to assemble it. Here we've left the weapon with the hands on them separate to make it easier to paint. In the case of the gargantuan Storm Raptor, we left that in several pieces. There was the main bird, but then the tail, the stone it was sitting on, and the 2 lightning bolts on the head were all left separate for painting. The second step is to plan your color scheme. For the Storm Raptor, I decided to use a golden eagle as my reference, so I looked for images online that I could refer to when I was painting the bird. The little model I'm using for this demo is a much easier decision because, first of all, I've already established my army's colors, but I've actually already painted another version of this character called Kaya, so I already know exactly what colors I'm going to need. The third step is to apply the base paints. Now, base paints are highly pigmented, and they're designed to cover in a single coat. I have a gold base paint that I use for my armor, a dark silver metallic for the metal in my weapons, a dark brown for the wood and the leather, a skin color, a light gray for my hair, and a dark green for the fabric. It took me about an hour to base paint this piece. One of the rules I use is paint from the inside out, which means you paint the deepest surfaces first. That's almost always the skin. But in the end, you have to cover every bit of primer. You have to block out the color of every component. You have to be neat. If you make a mistake, you can always go back and touch it up. And in the end, you get a completely painted piece, but it's a little flat. The real depth comes from the next step. That's when you apply the shades. Now, shade paints are very thin. They're almost the consistency of water. They're designed to sink into the recesses of the miniature model. Some of the shade paints can do double duty, so this one, for example, works on the skin and the gold in the armor. But this green one I only use, in this case, for the green fabric. I have a black one called Nuln Oil, which goes over both the gray in the hair and the silver on the weapons. And Agrax Earth Shade goes over my brown base paint. Shades are applied liberally and with a relatively large brush. It only took me about 15 minutes to shade the model. You do, however, have to stop and let it dry because that shading in the recesses is going to take a while to be completely dry. Some people go back and repaint all the base paints in the high areas, but I only do that for the cloak because it's a big area, it's important. It took me about 5 minutes to do. The next step is to apply the layer paints, which are thinner paints than base paints and are the main colors in your final model. I apply a medium green to the folds of the cape, and I use a medium brown to pick out the leather straps as they cross over the leather pants so they're easier to see. I have a couple special techniques I had to learn to do the armor, this pink inlay in the armor and the green gems on the Storm Raptor. I turned my pink layer paint into a glaze by mixing it with a glazing medium. This makes it fluid enough that I can just drop it in with a brush into those inlay positions. You can get a nice gemstone effect by painting a bright silver layer and then using this special waystone green paint for the gem. So except for painting the straps, which does take a steady hand, I find painting layer paints much easier than base paints, and it took me about a half hour to do this step. The next step is the highlighting. To me, highlighting is about showing where the light would hit on the model, making it more three-dimensional, and really making the metal shine. I have a light green for the highlights in the fabric. I use the same color for the skin on the forehead, the nose, and the cheeks. I have a bright silver for my weapons. And I have a beautiful rose gold that I use for all my armor, and this tends to separate when it sits, so I put it upside down and set it aside for about 30 minutes before painting with it. I have a very light gray for the hair, and I dry brush that on, which is a technique where you wipe out most of the paint in the brush before applying it to the figure. I use that on the hair, and I use it on the feathers on the Storm Raptor. I use my light to guide me in the application of highlights. Where the light hits the model is where the highlight paint should go. Highlighting took me about another half hour. At this point, you may need to finish assembling your model. For the Storm Raptor, I used peanuts like this to support the pieces as I glued them together. It's much easier for a small model like this where you just need to glue on the weapon. The final step is to finish the base, and in a Hordes army, you need to paint the front half of the base a different color from the back, so it's clear what the front of the model is for playing the game. I use a dark gray for the back of the base and a medium green for the front of the base. And the way I get the halfway marks on it is I've drawn this little device here that lets me take all the different base sizes. I just put it in the middle and use a pencil to draw the lines on either side to show where 50-50 is. Then I glue on some little grass tufts and I'm done. It takes about 15 minutes to do the base. So here's the finished model. It takes about 3 hours of effort over the course of a day. It's always good to finish with a spray coat of matte varnish to protect it during playing. The Storm Raptor, on the other hand, is obviously a much more complicated project. It took about 15 hours over the course of a week to paint, but it was a labor of love. I have lots of other projects for gaming and gamers. If you're interested, please subscribe to my channel.